Well, good morning again, everyone. Want to thank Bharat and Jaime for the great presentation and setting the stage and leading this whole work stream. My name's, what? Oh.
Got it.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about this next session is policies to accelerate data center heat reuse and a work stream update. We have a couple products. The first part, I'll talk about a white paper. We'll both talk about policies to accelerate heat reuse. And then we'll also talk about a two-page or roughly two-page guidance for local authorities, and then we'll end with a call to action. My name's Otto Vangeet. I'm co-lead of the policies stream. I'll let David, my colleague, introduce himself. I'll kind of cover the first half of this. I'm a principal engineer at the National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL. We're one of the few dots on the screen in America that's people using heat reuse and are reusing heat, and we've done that for over a decade in the Denver, Colorado area. This is an image of the policies document that I'll talk about, and then David will talk about, and then a QR code and a link for it also. These will all be available, of course. So the opportunity. Data center, if we can use some of the heat from data centers, we can obviously cut carbon emissions and hopefully reduce costs. What the policies paper is talking about is how we can monetize the sale of heat, cutting power costs and carbon footprint. It also talks about the policies for end users for replacement of fossil fuel-based heat, primarily natural gas, with data center heat. And again, the end result of that is, again, hopefully cutting costs and most importantly, reducing the carbon footprint. In the policies document and some of the other documents Jaime had talked about, we talk about applications, potential end use, the heat host, as we like to call it in these documents. An obvious one is space heat. Northern European countries do this fairly well with district heating systems. But there's also processes that can use waste heat. And pharmaceuticals, for example, use heat. Food and beverage uses lots of heat in their processes. Commercial refrigeration type systems. Fuel production, especially like bioethanol, needs heat as part of their process. And then things like water distillation, desal, if you're near coastal areas or sources of water that need desal, if you can use that heat to help with the desal process, and water treatment. And part of the takeaway with the policies is how do you get the people generating the heat, the data centers, next to the heat hosts, and what policies can help implement that. The way policies can be used is to overcome the challenges of things like lack of knowledge. A lot of people think there's no opportunity. It's a data center, uses a lot of energy, what happens to all of it? So that's the knowledge base and awareness. The proximity is a big deal. It's much easier the closer the heat generation source is, the data center, to where the heat host is, and then connections between the data center and the heat user. Some other challenges is supply and demand discrepancies. What happens if the data center's down, or what happens if the heat host doesn't need the heat? So that's the discrepancies part. And then data center heat use projects might face project delays, risks and costs that need to be taken into account with the policies. And then probably most importantly, there's a lack of national and subnational policies. And David will talk about these in some upcoming slides. And that's a place where the EU states have done a better job than North American states and countries. So as part of this, we did we didn't look at all the policies, but we identified, this map is a nice example. We looked at North America, meaning America and the US and Canada, and then the European Union countries. You can see these policies can kind of be broken down into three distinct parts. Standards and requirements, what's required for a data center in, for example, Germany, and what standards exist. Analyzing possible uses and then sharing that information, like the heat or the pharmaceuticals or et cetera that we had talked about. And then the third area can be what kind of incentives can be put in place, economic, tax, those sorts of things. So there's requirements and then there's incentives. Like we heard several times, and like you'll hear in the next few slides, the EU is far ahead of North America and the rest of the world, and we can probably learn something by going over those policies and standards, and that's what David is going to do.
Great. Thanks, Otto. Good morning, everybody. I'm David Gardiner. I run a climate change and clean energy consulting firm, very creatively known as David Gardiner and Associates. My interest here is in trying to take data center heat and find ways that it can be a solution on the climate change side. So I'm going to give you a very quick tour of some of the policies. Really what I'm about to give you are examples from each of the three categories that Otto was just talking about. The first is, in fact, in Germany. It's about standards and requirements, and I think Germany is far ahead in the rest of the world in establishing not just energy efficiency requirements for existing data centers, but heat reuse requirements for new data centers. If you're opening a data center in July 2026 or after, you must reuse a minimum of 10% of the heat there. And that ramps up over time, as you can see here, from 15% in July of 2027 to 20% of July of 2028. So I was thinking when Jaime was doing his little poll, how many people are interested in some parts of the world, and I think you'll see increasing parts of the world, you will be required to pay attention to it, even if you may not be interested in it at the moment. And I think that's a key thing to keep in mind, is that all of these policies are likely to be coming much more so around the globe. In the Netherlands and the Amsterdam regions, there are standards and requirements for greater sustainability in a variety of ways, some about energy efficiency. The standard here for heat reuse is just that you must be, it really is an encouragement, I'm not sure it's really a requirement, that you must prepare or should prepare infrastructure that allows that heat to be captured in the data center and potentially be redistributed somewhere else. So again, that's a good example of something that's perhaps happening not at a national level, but at a local level, and there definitely are other requirements within these policies here for data centers to become more sustainable. As Otto mentioned, there's a second category here, what I've broadly called promoting collaboration, getting at the point that Jaime, I think, was making earlier, that the importance of establishing partnerships. So the EU has a heat and cold matching platform that matches up, or is intended to match up, people who have excess heat with potential end users or off-takers. It's a lot of focus on energy-intensive industry, but data centers can certainly play, and the idea is then that those who might need the heat would come there. And there are other countries within the EU, Germany, Ireland, and Norway, that have similar things. And again, there's a project underway with OCP and this working group to try to figure out how to build that out more in Europe. A slightly different policy exists in New York State here in the United States, which allows the creation of thermal energy networks. And there's, in fact, a project that the local gas company, Con Edison, is doing in Manhattan in New York City to take all the heat from a nearby data center to provide heat and hot water to a low-income multifamily residential building. So interesting kind of enabling policy in New York State. There are incentives, as Otto said. We identify a couple. Washington State has a so-called industrial symbiosis program, not totally focused on data centers. They're trying to figure out how can we take waste from all sorts of industrial and other users and make it go someplace, but data center heat reuse is definitely included in it, and grants are available for up to $500,000. Germany has a focus on decarbonizing its district heating, but again, that's a place where data centers could potentially apply for funding. They have quite a lot of money, 3 billion euros rather, available through the end of 2026 to help decarbonize the district heating sector. And I will say that at the regional meeting in Lisbon, the district heating folks were present because they're interested in working with data centers to try to make that happen. As others have mentioned, a product that we're working on, you can access the draft by using this code here, is focused on local authorities, because local authorities have a lot of ability to influence the development of data center heat reuse projects. This slide says some of them are unaware of the potential. I would say the vast majority have no idea what a data center heat reuse project could be, or what it might do and how it might be helpful to their community. So this fact sheet is out here for that purpose. Obviously, also, we help to identify the challenges. It's short and direct. It's not a white paper like a traditional product or some of the other products that you might have seen from OCP. It's intended to be a short introduction to it and provide some guidance. And that guidance includes, once they understand the potential and some of the challenges, that they should be thinking about policies and incentives and how they can be applied in a way that would be helpful to encouraging the project to go forward. They should make the data center heat reuse a focus of their economic development plans. Lots of local governments are thinking about how to have a data center be part of their local economic development plans, but they should actively be thinking about the potential for reuse of that heat in their communities. The transition, the time it takes to develop a data center and to think about all the things that you would need to do to make that a part of your local plan is an important focus of it. So helping local authorities think about the timeline for not only data center project development, but what's their timeline for developing things and the kinds of facilities that they might need to reuse that heat. And finally, it urges them to leverage urban planning. And so that's, of course, on that sort of longer timetable that may be helpful, and they should be thinking about all the ways that those things might come together. So, and then finally, on the policies work stream, we have a call to action. This was in the policy papers because we're interested in trying to figure out how to accelerate the policies that do enable heat reuse from data centers. And so we call on policymakers, the data center industry, here we are right here, intermediaries, those that might be the bridge between a data center and an end user or an off-taker, as well as the end users and off-takers, to help work with us to try to shape these policies and advance them to move forward. I would just add a little further thought since the paper came out. I would just say in the United States, for example, there's so much concern about how it's possible that we're going to meet the energy demands of the data centers that we need to build in the United States that I think this is going to be an important focus for people. They may be less focused on the climate change benefits the way I articulated at the outset, but I think they're going to be very interested in trying to figure out how we can lower the power demand that data centers are going to need in this country. And heat reuse is a way to do that. So I think that's it for us. Do we have time for any questions?
Any questions?
Hello, Matt Kokel, Affiliated Engineers. I actually have multiple projects that are in design and construction right now that are actually doing this, and Otto is keenly aware. My question to you all is, policy is one thing, but reality is another. I'm curious, where does the intersection of your policy approach and the interaction of reality come into play? For example, a data center is always producing heat, and in most climates, heat is not even a consideration for many people. So what are we going to do with the remaining portions of that heat that aren't going to be used? Now, I get it, there's discussions about, farmlands and other types of places that may be able to reuse some of that heat. But where data centers are being placed currently are not necessarily in those locations. So I'm just curious where those two pieces interact.
Sure. I'll start. We'll tag team with this. Thanks, Matt. Great questions. Just to start with, policies, we use the German example that require it, forces people to do it. That's great. If not, you do end up with scenarios where it's the data center in the middle of the field, in the middle of nowhere, and it gets way tougher. So policies hopefully push you in that direction, certainly important. Another part of your question was, what do you do with the heat when you don't need it? That's where if you can cite and policies or incentives can help incentivize this, where you can use some of the heat some of the time. Anything you do is better than doing nothing. The more you use it, it's pretty obvious from an engineer's point of view like you. The more you use it, the better the economics, but doing something with it, even if you're, heating a greenhouse, melting snow, anything is better than using more energy to reject that heat out the cooling tower and use water. So I think there's policies to push you, and then there's good engineering. A lot of engineers will just build the data center and cool it with conventional means and not think outside the box of what else can we use for heat. The more we educate everybody here, the more that comes into play. So that's a start to your questions, and I'll let David go further.
Well, my only thought would be to say that I think it's really important for the industry to come forward and say on policy, here's what we need, here's what would work, here's what would be useful. And it sounds to me like you're in the midst of doing a couple of projects that are doing this kind of thing, so that sort of expertise that you may be painfully earning right at the moment could be really, really helpful, because I do think, especially among policymakers, it's a relatively blank slate here. And it's always better to come forward with ideas about how it should work and what are the kinds of things that would make a difference, instead of having somebody apply it to you in a not very well-informed way.
I'm going to add a little bit again, kind of back and forth tag team, but publicizing what you're doing. You saw in the U.S. map there was like 3 dots. That's sort of embarrassing.
We're going to double that.
What's that?
We're going to double that number.
Good. Yeah, double it, publish it, let us know, and we'll put it on the sites that Jaime had talked about. And it's an advantage for you as an industry professional. It's like, hey, I know how to do this, and here's the success story behind it. So, great. Build a whole bunch more.
So maybe a follow-up to that. So energy reuse is not necessarily free, per se.
Nope.
How do you see the energy companies getting involved in this and helping to correlate your possible policy with incentives and things like that? Have you had conversations with them to figure out how to implement this?
You mean power or gas companies? Is that what you're thinking?
Power utility companies. Yep.
I'm not sure they know at the moment. I'm speaking with the U.S. perspective because I don't do very much work in the EU, so I don't think they know, and that was part of the reason that I think our call to action includes engaging with intermediaries. I think utilities could be. It's not clear to me. I've had some conversations, for example, with gas utilities, and said maybe you should be a thermal transporter instead of a gas transporter, and they looked at me with a blank look. On the other hand, you saw Con Edison, a gas utility, participating in a project in New York City. So I think there are openings there, and that could be advantageous to use them because with their regulatory authority, at least in the US, they might be able to pay for things in a way that might be complicated for either the data center or the off-taker.
Yeah, I'll elaborate again, and these are excellent questions. Certain states in the U.S. have aggressive carbon reduction goals, meaning reduce your fossil fuels, a lot of which is for heating. There's some analogies to using data center heat there's some Northeast states that have geothermal-based heating districts that they were building. That could just as easily be data center-based heating districts. getting that knowledge out there and getting the utilities to think, hey, geothermal's great, data centers are even better, kind of be a win-win. So there's big opportunities there. How do you get them engaged? Man, if anybody has answers to that, we'd love to do it.
And just to add, in the EU, there is awareness of this. I mean, utilities are very aware of this. They are being involved in this. They're creating work streams to talk about this. We have a very good connection with Euroheat and Power, which is the federation of district heating companies in Europe. And we are working on this matchmaking platform, actually, to make this possible. And also in the paper, actually, they talked about, we are talking also about different usages for heat reuse. I mean, tropical lands, drying foods, for example, drying coffee, drying vegetables and fruits, and so on. There's not only heat for heating. I mean, there's also for desalination, etc. Lots of opportunities. Energy is energy. Energy is always a good.
I would say one thing that isn't in the policy paper, but I just found out about it last week, is that in Northern Virginia, obviously a home to an awful lot of data centers, there's a local government commission, the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, that is actually looking at building a district heating system in order to use data center heat to heat. They're mostly looking at public buildings, like schools or maybe government office buildings. But it's the first I've seen of a thing like that in the United States. So, and obviously it's in a really important data center region, not necessarily, it's unclear how many new data centers are going to go in there, but they're thinking about it even with the existing data centers. And so I think there are people out there who are going to be looking at this, and part of the purpose of our paper, and really frankly I think our broader efforts, is to expand the pool of people who know about this and are part of helping shape what the right answers will look like.
All right, thanks everyone.
Great.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.